welcome my English-speaking audience to my TV discussion of Rangin Kaman, or in English, Rainbow. It is a television in Paris, and I am a presenter of this television in foreign languages, namely French, German, and English. My guest is today Dr. Bijan Eftekhari. Dr. Bijan Eftekhari is an economist and political activist, and also, like me, a presenter, a voluntary presenter of Iranian opposition's broadcasters, namely in Persian language. I was also his guest sometimes. Now we are going to talk about two important subjects. But before that, I give you words if you want to greet our audience, and please, the words belong to you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Jahanshah Rashidian, and it's very nice to be with you and with your audience. I say hello from sunny San Diego to all over the world, and thank you for inviting me.
Okay, our subjects today to discuss are two main subjects, actually like questions, namely why the European Unions or EU seems to have deals with the regime, with the Islamic regime, and his relations since many, many years. The second one is if the Islamic regime is finally on the verge of falling apart. Let's hear and get your points about these two subjects briefly, and then we develop that afterwards. Please, go ahead.
Yes, these are very important and interesting subjects. The first one regarding the European Union and how they deal with this regime. Within last 40 years, we have seen that European Union, especially Germany, France, Italy, and England, they have been have a kind of hate and love with this regime. Their relation is a kind of hate and love. They hate this regime because they know that they are cheating. They don't have any moral principles. They do whatever it takes to stay in the course of government. At the same time, they love this regime because this regime is very generous regarding the superpowers and the European Union. How generous? They offer them their oil and gas, mainly the oil, with special discount, just to keep their mouth shut. Don't say anything about what is going on in Iran. I can't hear you. Your microphone is.
And I told you, and also support the regime in the international institutions like UN and so on.
Yes.
Okay.
And Jahanshah, please feel free to come into discussion. I don't like to just speak to myself. So
okay,
please.
Of course.
Yes. So we know the hate and we know the love, and we have seen this relationship within the last 40 years between European countries and Iranian regime. You know, the total amount of European Union export to Iran in 2012 was a number close to $16 billion. $16 billion of European products, materials, raw materials has been exported to Iran. and European countries was the first business partner with Iranian in 2012. A lot of things has been changed within last 9-10 years from 2012, but still European Union are one of the most important partners for Iranian regime, exporting close to $16 billion, $16 billion from European countries to the Islamic regime, means creating about 1 million jobs. So 1 million jobs, and if we multiply that with their family member, comes to about 4 million people lives in and job in European countries depends on having business with Iranian regime. And probably that's the most important part, that they turn their eyes to another side, don't try to see what is going on in Iran. At the beginning, you mentioned something about the gentleman Babak Khorramdin has been butchered in Iran. And they don't want to see that. They don't want to talk about that. We have seen that European diplomats, especially women, they have accepted to cover themselves in
Islamic hijab.
Yeah, Islamic hijab, and like 2,000 years ago, when the man was the predator and trying to rape anybody, even women, donkeys, whatever. So they accepted that to come to Iran like we are like a lamb, and don't touch me, please. Something like that, which we don't agree, and we don't see that in at least in European and Western civilization. But they accept that just because they want to make a deal. They want to make a very sweet deal. So they try not to talk or say anything about what is going on in Iran. At the other side, Iranian regime is always trying to say that, we are a very normal country. Our culture is different, but we don't do anything crazy. And this is something that European countries, the diplomats, are trying to accept, at least to talk about it to their people, that yes, this is a little different, but it's the cultural differences. These are not murderers. They didn't kill people in Mykonos restaurant. They didn't kill Shapur Bakhtiar in France. They didn't kill American in Iraq. No, this is a normal regime for Middle East, that we have cultural differences, but we can make deal with them. And see, there is some reformists in the regime, so we can do something about that. Okay. This is just for, I believe it's just for public.
Yeah.
Inside, they know what is going on in Europe.
I will ask you probably some more questions to detail all about these stories that go on. But you just were talking about Babak Khorramdin, and you said people in Europe do not talk about that. Of course, I read some papers in French and German describing the crime as real, but as we know, we are still suspect. We presumably say that he was killed by his parents. And let me first express my deep sorrow for an Iranian filmmaker, Babak Khorramdin, who was presumably killed and dismembered brutally by his religious parents. His dismembered body parts were wooden plastic bags thrown in the trash cans around their house. That was written in many papers. The father is a retired colonel of the Islamic regime. He expressed himself in some interviews with some fanatical belief, and he justified his crime as a correct act. This horrible crime actually, in this manner, express also something else deeply for us Iranian people, that such a psychology has not been before in Iran. It has been born through the effects of Islamic regimes, ideology, and brutality. And that is the kind of influence of mullahs' effects on moral injury among our people. Even young kids do that. When they play, they do this kind of brutal scenarios together as a just normalized play. So if you want to express yourself, I'll let you. If not, we can ask some more questions about our main discussions. Up to you.
Yes, Jahanshah, unfortunately, this is not new. Killing own children is something that has started from the beginning of this regime 43 years ago. Exactly. You know, some of these called the leaders of Islamic regime in Iran, they have killed their own kids. They have ordered executing their own kids. So this is not new in their culture.
Exactly. Gilani, Jannati, a few of them, I know that.
Exactly. Just
they executed
they ordered to kill and to execute their own kids because of their idea was different than them. Yeah. That's it. They didn't believe in Islam. They didn't believe in their Islamic regime, and their father ordered to kill my boy because he doesn't believe in what I believe. So this is something new for Iranian. We never had such a kind of culture to kill our own kids because they don't think just like us. But it is not new to the Islamic regime. This is their culture. So they are trying to develop this culture among the Iranian, and unfortunately, now I think that they have made a lot of progress, unfortunately. Yeah. The thing is, I said European Union, and I didn't mean the people. I have the highest respect for European people, but the European diplomats, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to say anything about it. They don't offer any condolences. They don't say we are sorry to hear that. They just don't want to, you know, put any dot or any dent on the picture that they have provided to European people about Islamic regime, which is it's a normal regime. It's sometimes they do some crazy thing, but they are under control. Let's make the deal. Let's make the deal. Don't worry about that.
Yes. Okay. So, in this sense, if you want, we can talk more about our main questions that you want to develop a little bit more. The UN with the Islamic regime, since its inception, 43 years, or at least 40 years, always has got a very flattering, a very friendly relations. And as we mentioned in another program, the Islamic regime is not only a good partner, but a good client for the regime. As you just mentioned, the corrupt regime is generous enough to satisfy any foreign country in order these countries support the regime in the international institution like, for example, UN or any other European parliaments. So let's talk about the Islamic regime as a good client, not only for Europe, but also for China, for Russia, for some other countries around, India, Korea, North Korea, South Korea, and as you just mentioned, everywhere, United Arab Emirates, because it is not only Europe, United Arab Emirates is one of the biggest partner of the regime. United Emirates, that means there are some emirs there, some small, Persian Gulf countries that all together could not be as big as a province in Iran. But they now make big deal with Iran. And those are actually very strongly supporting also the life of the regime. And Europe wants also bring the Islamic regime in the organization of World Trade or World Trade Organization, WTO. Although the EU, as you just mentioned, sometimes cautiously, gently criticize the regime, accuse the regime of killing or repressing its own people. Shame on this Europe, because only just a little wars, very gently, the Islamic regime killed thousands of Iranians, violated brutally, even raped people, men and women. Yeah, that's something that never happens in all over the world in the contemporary history. Even Nazis, they didn't do that. But Islamic regime does that. A rapist regime. And after all, they do good commerce with such a partner. They even created something like a kind of instrument like Instex, that is Instex. That means they could now get around all the problems with America because of the American sanctions to have their, as you said, sweetie deals with the Islamic generous regime. And it's basically, as you mentioned, these European countries to have this initiation also, to have this kind of relation with the regime are Germany, France, England at the top of them. Yeah. Instex is an idea of these three countries. In French, it's called TOC, and they were initiated also. They have initiated also that. The question is, you said that Europe loves, sometimes hates as well, but which sentiment is stronger, love or hate? And who is beneficiaries? Who profits of this relation? Europe, Islamic regime, or people of Iran? Because some people say, some people accuse, for example, the West of sanctions on Iranian people. Is that a right word here, right expression? Or we should say only the Islamic regime? Who are actually affected through that and who have more interest? Please go on.
Jahanshah, you put the very smart words together, and I believe you mentioned a few things that is the key here. First, you talked about Instex. Instex was something created by greedy European diplomats to get around the sanctions, American sanctions. So it shows how the deal is sweet, how sweet is the deal that they are trying to get around the sanctions of United States against the Islamic regime. It shows how greedy they are that want to keep that relationship alive. So I think that this answers that who benefits here. Of course, European countries benefit here a lot. Regarding the regime is just giving these ransoms to stay in the power. See, it's a kind of ransom to stay in the power. They say, you know, European countries, you don't like our culture. You don't like that we kill our people. You don't like when you hear that we rape women and men in the jail. We understand that, but how about this deal? How about some oil, free of charge, or pay half a price, or something like that? They sweeten the deal, and then the European will start to say, oh, I hate this guy, but the oil is very sweet. I love this oil. So second partner is Iranian regime want to stay in power. Who doesn't get any benefit is Iranian people. For example, after that nuclear deal with the 5+1, the European and American accepted to release a lot of funds, Iranian funds in European and American banks to the Iranian regime. $150 billion was released to this regime. What happened to the people? People are getting poor and poor and poorer. So nothing goes to the Iranian people. Whatever comes to Iran, it will distribute among the thieves in the regime, from the so-called rahbar or great leader, comes down to the other Iranian so-called leaders or diplomats or whatever they are. These thieves, they just get the money. So I think that the sanction, of course, will affect Iranian people, but mostly will affect the regime and ability of regime to pay to the terrorists all over the world to keep the world in chaos. So my answer is, I believe the sanction is something that could help Iranian people to start fighting with this brutal regime.
Okay, you mean that Europe actually is sitting on the fence, and one side is material interest, as you said, oil, gas, some other natural resources,
and selling and exporting their machinery and raw materials to Iran.
Actually, and another part, which can be love, a mixture of love and hate, of course, all the time. Yeah, love and hate actually are two parts of one coin psychologically.
Yes,
they go together. You hate or you love, and you can actually reverse one to another. That's also possible because of this fragile sentiment that can happen in a kind of depression or in a kind of anxiety or any psychological problems. So moral virtue for European here is zero.
Sure.
So the other side of the fence, which could be moral virtue, is not so important to prevent this greedy for interest and being afraid of the corrupt and brutal and mad mullahs. That's also, of course, something that will be reflected in the contemporary history and probably our children will learn that in their schools in future, that it's happened in the so-called civilized world, a kind of apologizing a real brutal regime, killing and raping its own people, men and women. So if you want to talk about something else, how about the Russia and China? What kind of roles they do have? Because regime wants to keep its power, its political powers in any price. And for regime, there is no problem. They can play any games with any pick, no matter who is the player, but they want to keep their own power in any price, and they are ready to pay a very high price for that. They pay this price from the Iranians' money, Iranians' resources, Iranian waters, Iranian everything. What kind of problems we have, Iranians will have, especially probably after the fall of this regime, with these countries, China, Russia, Europe? What kind of reaction people would have? Is that this reaction, in your opinion, controllable, or will probably Iranian wants to, for example, cut any diplomatic relation with European countries or China or Russia? What kind of future do you see after the fall of the regime, which is our second part of the discussion, of course? Go ahead.
First of all, regarding the Russia, China, and probably India, their relation with Iranian regime is their view of this kind of relation with regime is completely different than what regime thinks about that. Regime tries to show off that we are a kind of strategic partners. Now we are a strategic partner with Russia, with China, and probably very soon with India. That's what regime tries to show off, because he wants to show to say to the European countries and American that if you don't work with us, we're gonna go exactly under the wings of the Russia and China, something that you hate. So be with us, bear with us, work with us, and accept us. That's what they are trying to show up. On the other side, the Russian, China, I don't see any kind of strategic relationship with this regime, to be honest with you. They have the same idea that European Union has. This is a big cow. It has a lot of milk, and we want our share. Yeah, that's it. So it's simple from their side. Of course, they compete with European and with American to get a better piece of pie here or more milk here. But I don't see any kind of strategic relation with Iranian regime at all. So
how about the UN? Because the UN is supposed to be an important institution to defend people, the nations, not the states. And the UN must be enough determined to consider this regime not a representative of people, because the regime is like apartheid. It's not representative, it's not legitimate, and still the UN act if regime were a representative of people, chosen by people. What is this UN, this toothless tiger actually for many Iranians? What do you call this institution?
You know, It depends of how you think about the UN and its, let's say, head of the organizations. If you think they are independent, of course, then we have to ask why, if you are independent and you can say what is right and what is wrong, how come you have never taken a deep look at Iranian regime and what they have done to the Iranian people after the revolution, 1979 revolution? But in my opinion, it's a little optimistic. I think the UN is an organization which has to satisfy the needs of the superpower. And because of that, they adjust their policy with them. They are not independent. They just adjust their policy with them to see what they want to say, what they want. Sometimes we see some independent signs from UN, which I believe is because of competition between the superpowers and who gets the more voice over there. So I don't see any kind of important role for.
Actually, you don't see any global justice which can be which can be developed through this institution called UN, which had an issue, actually political issue and also ethical issue to present, but it is not so presentable. That's what you mean, actually.
I call it hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy.
Yeah.
For example, you remember Muammar Gaddafi from Libya.
Yeah.
He was invited to UN, he went there, he gave a speech, and everybody applauded that, oh, that's great. And 6 months later, UN allowed that the European countries, they invaded Libya and killed Gaddafi within that 6 months. Yeah, so it depends how the superpower wants.
In 2011, yes, I remember that. Yes, okay.
So I don't see any, you said it right, it's a toothless tiger or a paper tiger.
So we don't have to play chess with a pigeon. The pigeon is the UN and is not actually so intelligent, so correct to defend the case of people, the interest of people, wherever they are in Libya or Iran or in Iraq, but they are mostly kind of sharing the interest with the superpowers, and they represent their interest in this big international institution. And
let me add something else. The UN and this kind of organization, these are tools in the hand of superpowers. Mm-hmm. So if they want to do something and they want to legitimize that, they use UN. That's it.
Okay, then we can now start with the second topic. Do you think the realm of mullahs is somehow over, and the regime is at the verge of, collapse? Is that what you think?
It's not something that you guess. You have to know what are the signs of a regime collapse. And this is based on whatever happened to the regimes in the past that has collapsed, especially the case study is Russia before revolution. So, they call it revolution. Or you remember, it was a very, at least one of the superpowers in 90s. But it collapsed, and nobody invaded that country. Nobody, there was not a war here, there.
But there were some signs of collapse. And what are the signs
exactly.
now in this Islamic regime?
Exactly. So we can see the similarity here. First, in any kind of ideologic regime, it starts with the who will run the country? Who are the managers, the top managers? In an ideologic regime, it doesn't matter if he's a specialist or not. It's important that how faithful he is to the regime and to the ideology. So you start to put, wrong people in high positions.
Exactly.
Okay, so you have a very weak management in the country. What happens when you have a weak management in the country? The weak management first brings a lot of expenses, waste, and at the same time, they cannot meet the goals. See? So the country starts to pay a lot and getting a little in the back. When the management is weak, during the long run, let's say within 20 years, people start to see that their life is getting worse. It's not getting better. They don't see a better future. Now the people start thinking that maybe these are not right people here and start to criticize. So now regime have another problem. His legitimacy among the people is under question. And now they start to try to oppress people, to keep people, under control. This is another expenses that you have to pay.
Exactly. So there are actually principles underlying a collapse of a regime, both from inner or foreign, because we have not talked about foreign factors. Foreign factors is the international isolation, the American pressure on the Islamic regime, and also sometimes their friends, European, they know gently sometimes to criticize the regime because of its huge repression in Iran, huge humiliation of the human rights in Iran. But so if you want to talk about more precisely, there are inner and foreign factors. Implodes from inside or explodes from outside. I think both factors from inside and outside can make collapse a regime. What kind of factors do you see more important, determined? Is outside or inside? Is American pressurizing or Iranian not satisfactory attitudes towards the regime? What factor is stronger, inner or outside?
I believe, first of all, we should recognize and distinguish between collapse of a regime and regime change. These are two different things.
Of course, yes, I know.
Collapse is something that starts from inside. Regime change could be done by foreign countries or even from inside, but not in the regime. Comes from the people. We are talking about the collapse. And regarding collapse, it always starts from inside the regime. Mm-hmm. Regime cannot meet the expectation of the people.
Okay.
Cannot control people. and cannot continue to govern the country. So these are the signs. Right now, we see that regime has lost his legitimacy among the Iranian people. That's the first part. That's why coming election is so important to them, to at least show off, a kind of show off that, no, people still want us. This is something that Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of the regime, has told everywhere, that, you know, we do whatever we do because we are legitimate by Iranian people based on our elections. 70% of the people come to election and they vote, and that's the base of our legitimacy, which is we know completely a show off, and it's not true. That's the first part. The second part is when European or foreign countries realize that, you know, people are really angry with this regime, be careful to make any long-term investment with this regime. Just do whatever it takes for a short-term, 4 months, 6 months, whatever. That hurts the regime, because regime needs a lot of foreign investment in different ways. I mean, in gas, in oil, in infrastructure, everywhere. So regime needs investment from foreign countries, but they realize that, no, we cannot count on this regime for next 10 years. We don't know what's going to happen. So don't do any long-term investment. That's the second part. Third, and probably finally, it comes when people start to demonstrate that they are against this regime. That's the very important part, because with that, then we see that even some inside the regime, they start to, try to go another way to discontinue their relation with regime. And this is something that we will see very soon, or probably we have started to see, that in the regime, some try to show that, we are against, even you see right now the Ahmadinejad, the guy which is part of the Sepah, he shows that I'm against this situation. We have to change it. It's not possible to continue. That's correct. They cannot continue. For that science, it tells me that the regime is on the verge of collapse. Collapse of this regime doesn't mean that it's going to be on the benefit of Iranian people. We may have another group of people come and take over the regime, the power, and continue the same system we have now, which is a very unfair system for Iranian people.
But Bijan, economic collapse does not mean actually a state collapse. We have many countries in America. You had that in 20th, a very big economic crisis, but it did not provoke a state collapse, a system collapse. It can happen also in Iran. But what you mentioned, meanwhile, is the treatment of people towards this regime. They do not accept regime as a part of themselves, but as a force of occupation, actually. The regime which rapes its own people cannot be a part of its people. That's just clear, okay? If not, we may see a kind of what's called social collapse or societal collapse. It happened, for example, before during the revolution in Russia in 1970. It happened many centuries ago with the Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire, and that means the whole thing, the army, the economy, the bureaucracy, the whole machinery is just served to pay and start with a new formation. What do you think if in Iran happens? Will all this regime must go away, or a part of that might detach from the regime and join, for example, People's Front? What kind of solution is now more accessible in this situation that people hate Iran, hate the regime, okay? But meanwhile, if we start, a revolution, many revolutions, what happened, for example, in Libya, in Iran itself, in China, a part of detached people from army, from security forces, for bureaucracy, join the revolution when they have no choice to be with the regime, which is on the verge of collapse. It can always happen. Do you think people, Iranian people or opposition, should accept this detachment from the regime and eventually joining the People's Front? If not, do not intervene in any side. What do you think?
It's a good question. See, Jahanshah, it's a kind of psychological thing here. Iranian people are, I believe, one of the most alive people in the world. They have been started war against this regime from very first day, especially the women. Iranian women has been in war with this regime from 1979 until today. The thing is, right now in Iranian psychology or Iranian mind, it says that we are not just fighting with this regime, we are fighting with the regime and its allies, which are European countries and even Russia, China, and probably United States. So we don't fight just the regime, we fight the world, and it's very hard. When I said that when the European countries, China and Russia and United States, they realized that this regime cannot continue and start their support of this regime will collapse very fast. Even we can see a kind of revolution by Iranian people. So that's why I am emphasizing, and I hope that European people realize that their government, their diplomats, their leaders, whatever they are helping a murderer regime to continue to murder Iranian people. If Iranian people realize that, okay, it sounds that they are not going to support this regime anymore, they're going to take care of this regime very fast. Okay. And on the other side, I'm sure that Iranian people has realized that they have to have a very good and close relationship with the European countries, American countries, United States, Canada, and all over the world, but based on respect and equality. Not just to, like the regime pay the ransom to stay in the power. No, we are not going to do that, but we are going to be a very independent country among the Middle East and try to have a equal and respectful and benefit for all of us to have a good relationship with all over the world. This is what we think that's going to be the next regime in Iran.
Okay, you think that you hopefully think that Iran probably is among the Islamic countries is the one who is the one that probably make a renaissance in the Islamic world, because Iranian people are those people who just experienced an Islamic regime, contemporarily. Centuries ago, they were forgotten in the history of people. But now they are reborn in our consciousness, and we know what they want to do actually. That's not a mystery, that's not a kind of, what story, but reality. That is an Islamic regime. And I have many friends, for example, as I was a student in France, there were many from Arabic countries, and they did not know why Iranians hate this regime or Islamic regime. They thought that was a divine, perfect regime for Iranians. Yeah, because they were not that awareness system. They did not experience such a regime. And Iranians are those people among the Islamized societies who know that what the real nature of such a regime is. And you cannot, put lipstick on a pig. The pig remains always ugly and a pig. And the Islamic regime is a real pig. So if you want to talk for 2-3 minutes before we finished because we come to term of our discussion for today, 2-3 minutes for your board's conclusion. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I want to explain that to the European and probably American people, that we Iranian people have experienced the same experience you had in Dark Ages. You remember the priests, the
Inquisition,
mm-hmm. The power of the priests all over the world. They could, kill anybody they wanted. They could take the money from anybody, confiscate whatever they wanted. We exactly experienced the same thing. The difference is, unfortunately, right now, your government helping this regime to stay in the power, and we suffer. So think about it. As long as there is a terrorist Islamic regime in Middle East who has money and pays to the terrorist groups all over the world, we're not going to have a peaceful life. You always gonna see the refugees, Muslim refugees in your countries, and they start to impose their own culture in your countries. The regime is a satanic regime, and unfortunately, your greedy leaders, policymakers, they still want to keep this regime alive. Don't let them do that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bijan Eftekhari. We approached our term for today. Of course, we will see each other in a new discussion, and probably I will be your guest for your Persian fantastic OC presentation. And we have many, many subjects to talk, not only for our Persian audience, but for our English or other languages that we present actually such discussions. It is important that, as you said, we make understand the international opinion, the international community, what is going on in Iran actually. And we need support, actually moral support, more than anything else. Just moral support is encouraging people to fight this barbaric regime. That is very important. Thank you, Bijan Eftekhari, my respected friend, good friend. We'll see each other next time, another time. And thank you, all my English-speaking audience of Rangin, Kaman, or Rainbow. We will see each other next time. Thank you. Till next time.